Welcome to Generation Movie on a Monday night, knee deep in our Oscars decade cavalcade. My name is J.W. Colwell. I'm the movie guy who flew south. As always, by Rich Drees from FILMBUFF Online. Rich, how is your evening going? How are you doing?
My evening's going pretty good. Dealing with a little bit of head congestion and some coughing, so I'm going to be riding my mute button a little bit tonight. So if you do see me coughing, but if I turn as blue as my background lighting, maybe be concerned. But other than that,
I'll send out a sled dog for you up north.
It's usually something I just kind of ride through. But
okay, good. So you're not going to hit the mute button because you're just you're cursing me underneath the microphone, which is good. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us on a Monday night for Generation Movie on the Indie Escape Network. We are pleased as punch to be at the Indie Escape Network. We have a YouTube channel that is set up for all of the Indie Escape Network's needs, and all of your needs as a viewer and a commentator and a purveyor of all things Generation Movie and all the other shows that are on the Indie Escape Network. We also have an amazing Facebook page that handles all the Indie Escape Network shows and concepts and things going on. We have a big advance thing happening this weekend at MegaCon with Harlow's Haunt and our very own Joe Ridgely, who's going and doing a con appearance with the entire cast of that independent horror feature that's taken the independent horror. It's a big world to fill right now. A lot of movies are coming out in the horror world, and it's doing very well. But we're super happy to be part of the Indie Escape Network. Super happy to be here on a Monday night, and super happy to just discuss some things before we get started tonight. Of course, we're going to be talking about the incredible One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher. That's our 70s movie. For people who have come out of the woodwork, by the way, in the last week, asking why we didn't do The Godfather, I'm just going to say that Rich and I talked about it. We also fiddled with the idea of maybe doing The Godfather Part 2 instead of Godfather 1. And we came upon the idea that maybe, just maybe at this moment in time, The Godfather is a little overhyped and overextended. And just, there's been a lot of it since the show came out from the Paramount Network where they were going the backstory of everything. So,
and I didn't think there was a whole lot that we could have added, if anything, to the Godfather discourse.
We really like The Godfather. We really like Sonny. You know what I mean? Like, it's very easy stuff that we would have been talking about. But tonight's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But first things first, I think one of the greatest ambitions in the film industry at this moment, if you're not making a superhero sequel, which, by the way, last two have not done very well, is to find IP that you create and that you function into a franchise. And I think one of the greatest things we've ever seen, and we have to talk about it on the movie show, John Wick Chapter 4 is an incredible culmination of this itty-bitty franchise that started in 2014, 9 years ago, and was kind of like this little action movie that a bunch of people went to see, 14 million in 2014, and we really liked. We came at him and we were like, hey, I like that character, I like the concept, he's fighting for his dog, everything's cool. Spoiler alert. And then Chapter 2 comes out, and Chapter 2 comes out 3 years later, and it grosses 30.4 million in its opening weekend. And, you think everything's great. It's a good sequel. People like it. You come out. We get a third film in Parabellum, Chapter 3 in 2019. $56.8 million opening weekend. It goes on to gross over $100 million. Franchise is well on its way to $500 million in total grosses. And then this weekend, we get John Wick Chapter 4, which grosses $73.5 million in its opening weekend, over $140 million, 137 worldwide. And it is an incredible story of two people, Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves, believing in a franchise, believing in practical effects, believing in practical stunt work, and just taking this franchise and making it into something totally special. And for all the people that bitch, moan, and complain that we don't have enough original stuff, John Wick, I know it's chapter 4 now, but it is a homegrown franchise. It has no IP. It is on its own. And I just, we need to celebrate it more, because every once in a while you need a John Wick to create a franchise. Mm-hmm. And we haven't had a lot of that. We've had a lot of things come out that are sequels. And actually, this March is shaping up to be one of the greatest box office months in the history of Marches. Right? We've had 3 sequels that where the sequels have done better, progressively better than the movies that started this particular part of this franchise. So the Creed movie doing exceptionally well, better than Creed 1 and Creed 2. Scream 6 doing exceptionally well compared to Scream, which came out last year. It is, the only movie that didn't do well compared to its predecessor, Shazam and Ant-Man, are the only 2, and they're the only superhero movies. So maybe we're in a superhero quadrant, but I don't think we are. But I just want to celebrate John Wick a little bit. And what do you? First off, it's a great movie. Everybody should see it in theaters.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Lots of, if you know where to look, there's certainly some little homages to certain things. Like the World's Greatest Edit that's in Lawrence of Arabia. They do a riff on that. And I absolutely chuckled when I saw that happen. I was just like, nice. There's a nice
have cherry blossoms fallen any better than like nods to Kurosawa, and as you're on top of the continental Osaka and just waiting for things to all shit to break down, and just John Wick standing on the corner and the cherry blossom tree in front of him and just the petals fluttering by him. It's just it's a special franchise.
A nice nod also to like the great Hong Kong action star Sammo Hung, which honestly sort of would have preferred to see him in there. But what was funny was when I realized, okay, that's what they're doing here is, winking towards Sammo Hung. The wardrobe that the character is in, the heavyset owner of the Berlin nightclub.
Yes.
That's the exact same suit Sammo Hung wears in this one movie where he has a fight with Danny Yen. So if they could have like somehow finagled the script to get, bring Sammo Hung in and then, have Danny Yen fight with him, it would have been awesome. But can't have everything. But, I appreciate that they knew
so much
to tip their hat.
I was trying
to. Speaking of that scene, that nightclub scene, that has some of the worst acting from extras I have ever fucking seen in my life.
Well, do you think that they maybe like sold it that they were going to be in a German nightclub for real? Like I kept on thinking that these people look, well, first off, there's bad acting in that sequence just because there is a large 350-pound man that's just stumbling through people with like an axe in his thigh, his leg, I don't know. I was too busy. I was so focused on the water and the fight itself with the German dude. Like the German guy fight is one of my favorite fights because it's a big guy that's actually moving. Mm-hmm. He's moving well. And he does damage, which is like you never see it. You always see chubby guys run away and cower, and he's like he's hoisting John Wick over a cliff and all kinds of cool stuff.
But for me, a lot of that fight is happening like 8 inches away from like a couple dancing, and you're like, do these people not have any sense of situational awareness whatsoever?
Maybe it's just how German nightclubs go, Rich.
And when they do see stuff, they're like, "Oh, it's like there's slow reactions. It's to the point where I would also say one of the things that's come out of John Wick. First off, let's get to some comments. Just say hi. Good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken. Joe Ridgely. Good evening, gentlemen. Is one of my favorite movies. Okay, we'll get to that. Never seen a Bond film, but well on his way to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Fair enough.
I'm personally not a Godfather fan due to what you just said, overhyped. It is overhyped. It's still a great movie, and Coppola is really great, but Coppola is also at times totally full of himself. So you have to play both things by ear. What I would say that another thing that came out of the John Wick train this weekend, aside from massive box office totals, hopes for a fifth film, talks of spin-offs like The Continental and Ballerina, and all the other things that have come out of this weekend with John Wick. Mm-hmm. One thing that I think needs to stick, and because we're doing an Oscar cavalcade, I think that we need to bring this up. I actually think Chad Stahelski is absolutely correct in mentioning that stunt people deserve some Oscar nominations. And particularly the people of this franchise and, other franchises that we see where there's massive amounts of action going on, where these people are, it's not just actors that are learning and honing in skills and crafts. It's people behind the cameras. It's also people that are standing in for our favorite stars. And I think one of the things that has to come out, like there are sequences in John Wick Chapter 4 where people are getting hit by cars, where dogs have been trained to jump on the tops of cars, where all of these things where there should be some sort of Academy recognition. And I want it to be like an ensemble piece thing, where, or, maybe best choreographer or whatever. But it needs an update. It needs something where we get some sort of look at the people that are energizing the world of stunt choreography, the world, and they deserve some Oscar gold.
Outside of craft services, the only other team in a film production that doesn't get recognized by the Oscars in any kind of way whatsoever is the stunt team, or the stunt coordinators, the stunt people, the riggers, everybody who puts all that stuff together. And I mean, and they have to know their job too, obviously, because this is dangerous stuff. And I've been saying this for years. I mean, even going back to, actually it was 4 years ago, excuse me, 4 years ago this week that we dropped an episode of the Big Picture podcast. And we had on as a guest a stunt woman, Heidi Schnapoff. I'm sure you know her, right?
I do. Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
That's
and
okay.
We talked about this. We talked about, the need for the Academy to recognize stunt people. And unfortunately, every year there's some discussion among, film writers and stuff like that, but nothing ever from the Academy, which is frustrating.
Well, and I just think I think where you really notice it when you look at these movies, how they're being created, how they're being crafted, and the fact that, the creator of this franchise started out as a stuntman.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And basically, the idea that it is dangerous work and that it is super dangerous, and they put all of their stuff out there for us. I think it might be time to push the Academy towards something where we get into that phase, and just try to figure it out. We got some
wondering if it's. I mean, I think the stunt performers are under SAG, if I am not mistaken, and so I'm wondering if it's going to need to come from push comes from SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, or do they have to create their own guild, Stunt Actors Guild, STAG or something like that. And they're the ones that, ultimately have to push the Academy towards that.
Well, that might be the way around it, because the guild organized some sort of organized push.
Yeah. And
Joe writes, Kane Hodder has been saying that for decades about stunt folks. And let's see. Julie Michaels from Roadhouse, the hot blonde Denise, was surprised that she was a stunt woman. Yeah, there is a, it is a viable thing that the Academy can notice. And it's not something where, if you look at the Best Picture nominees this year, every one of them had some sort of stunt coordinator on their set. And some sort of people that were making sure not only that our best and brightest are safe and secure, but, that the gun rigging is safe, that the weapons don't fire accident. Look what happened on the Rust set when we don't have somebody that's super careful.
again, maybe that's, you know, that's a good reason for the stunt people to have their own guild.
To be able to come up like, hey, you need these sort of and so maybe that's how you sell it to the Academy. You start it off as a certification process where there's a guild, and then you maybe jump into it where the guild basically, you know, works through SAG to have like people that are trained and make it into an Academy learning tool, but also make it into something that's important. Another big news story of the week that's kind of like dominating is, as we talked about, Ant-Man is kind of coming off this kind of a pepper lull. But the big story out of Hollywood this week is that a longtime Marvel executive named Victoria Alonso, who is is very out and proud about being a gay Latino who works for Disney, but also criticized Disney at the height of the stuff going on with Ron DeSantis and the state of Florida. Was recently let go. She was suddenly fired, and there was a lot of controversy. And she has retained one of the most prolific and successful entertainment attorneys in the history of Hollywood to basically go in and say that this firing was kind of like a crime and kind of like a shadow thing. And there's been a lot of articles in the last couple of days, most notably the Hollywood Reporter had a huge thing basically that her pushing of a certain Oscar-nominated film called Argentina 1985 was what prompted the firing. What do you think of something like this? First off, she's not a Marvel executive that creates all the things, and it's certainly not because of Ant-Man that she's getting fired.
No. But when the news broke 10 days ago now, last Friday, not this most recent Friday, but the Friday before, it kind of came at the end of a long week and was almost a news dump, kind of like one of those Friday night surprises things. Hollywood Reporter, it was done so quietly that people coming into work on Monday in the Marvel offices supposedly didn't even know. Some of them didn't even know. And the reportage came out that, there was HR people involved, and there was, Disney legal involved and everything else. And that's all we knew for several days. And immediately people go, some outlets went, oh, well, she's the president in charge of production, post-production, and visual effects and animation. Obviously, it's because Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was crap.
Yeah, it got picked up by a lot of people. It was picked up.
And it got broken, blah, 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 blah. Here's the problem with that, though. If you know anything about that corporate structure, she was not the last people to work. Yeah. She was not in any kind of creative role. She was basically
a fixer.
The person who made sure, okay, for production, okay, here's the money for the sets. Go out and hire everybody. Here's, she oversaw the process, not the creative side, but the actual technical process of making these films. And she was overseeing several films and a number of TV series all at the same time. And you have to give her a lot of credit for that. Ultimately, it comes out that she was a producer on this documentary, Argentina 1985. She felt very strongly about it.
She's also has a book deal with Disney, and there's a lot of kerfluffle there as well.
The documentary, though, is coming out through Amazon, and rightly so. In your contract with Disney, you have a non-compete clause that says, I will not work for another studio while I'm working for you guys. And it became a bone of contention, and they were like, okay, we will sign off on just this one project because it's really kind of outside of what we do. It's a documentary. We do superhero movies.
You're not really competing, is the way it was described.
It's not really that much of a competition.
Right.
Until the night of the Oscars, when she showed up in support of the documentary, as opposed to being in support of, hey, Marvel's here. We have an actress who's the first actress to be nominated for an acting award for a Marvel movie. Maybe we could be there to support her.
It's messy, and
Yeah.
It's messy, and also it like it's all going to get tied into like what I want everyone. When we look at stuff like this, when Rich and I decide what we're going to talk about to open a show, usually we want happy stuff. And this is one of the messier things. But what I think Rich and I are really upset about is that the moment it happened, it got kind of like sent out to the masses that, oh, look, they fired an executive from Marvel because Ant-Man failed. And it's like, that's not
it's
how it is.
Two events that happen close to each other are not necessarily causally.
They don't. It's not a cause relationship. That's true.
And I mean, I've studied this industry as a journalist for years and decades now, and just as a film fan for even longer. And I still don't believe I know how everything works, but I do know how some things don't work. And when I saw the knee-jerk reaction, especially coming from certain sectors who don't, are up, let's beat up on Marvel because Marvel is making movies that just aren't, white male cis heroes and things like that.
Right. They're beating up on Marvel movies that only gross $500 million. I think it's hilarious. I think,
honestly, Quantumania is probably going to be Marvel's first legitimate financial bomb. And I don't want to discuss any other.
Ken with a dagger. Everyone should have been fired after Thor: Love and Thunder. I don't hate it that much, Ken. But I understand.
Yeah, or at least some heavy rethinking should have been done after that movie. And there's a lot more about Quantumania I don't think we're going to get into tonight. Just because of that's still an early situation, and I don't think all the facts are there.
And
so
we
I
just
don't
want to. Why do that when we can go bubbling to the past and try to talk about a movie that is, by all intents and purposes,
much more cheery.
Well, I don't know that it's cheery, but it's definitely good. So, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is our movie tonight in the Oscar Decade Cavalcade. And this is one of the most interesting production histories if you don't know a lot about the movie. And so this is really cool. So Ken Kesey writes this book, right? And what happens is Kirk Douglas originates the role of McMurphy, right? Randle McMurphy on a Broadway stage in 1963 and 64. He purchases the film rights of the story. He works and pleads and begs to make the movie for 10, 11 years. Eventually gets a studio that won't make it. He eventually leaves the rights to his son, who is, doing the streets of San Francisco, Michael Douglas. And basically his son buys the rights. His son takes the rights and doesn't immediately find production value from it, but eventually talks Sal Zainitz to come in, who is a music producer, and produce the film. At which point, Michael Douglas has to tell his father, Kirk Douglas, you are too old to play McMurphy because you're in your 60s now, and I have to give the role to somebody else. If that isn't the saddest history we've done on this podcast, I don't know what, because I'm a huge Kirk Douglas fan. I've been a Kirk Douglas fan my entire life. I love him. I love his politics. I love everything about him. And the idea that he had this movie and he had it and he tried to get it made, and it has all kinds of ties to, what he viewed as Ken Kesey writing a book that had ties to, basically how, the indoctrination of people and basically being kept under the thumb and the rebel feelings inside people. And, he doesn't get to make it. He doesn't get to do it. He has to give it to his son. And his son then says, you're too old. I'm in awe of that. They offer the movie to everybody under the sun. McMurphy role goes out to Gene Hackman, James Caan, Marlon Brando, Burt Reynolds. But they all turn it down. And they eventually come upon a 37-year-old Jack Nicholson tearing things up in 5 Easy Pieces and a bunch of other great movies in the Easy Rider and all these great movies in the 60s and 70s. And it becomes one of his signature roles, right? Even though he beats all these other people off. They also have trouble casting what is arguably one of the most great, like the most evil film roles of all time. She's complex, but she's evil. She's manipulative. She's all these things. And actresses were so scared of this role, Rich. It's a who's who of who turned it down.
Oh yeah,
it's a who's who. We're talking Colleen Dewhurst, Ellen Burstyn, Angela Lansbury, Jane Fonda, Anne Bancroft, Geraldine Page, and Jane Fonda even said, "Yeah, you're going to win an Oscar, but you may never work again." And so it comes, which is one of the great quotes about the role. Like, yeah, you're going to win an Oscar playing this role, but you are going to play the evil woman that is in everyone's head, manipulative, destructive, harmful, in control of her own little universe. And they go to Louise Fletcher. Louise Fletcher says yes. And they get her for $1, Rich. She makes $10,000 for 11 weeks of shooting.
Oof.
Brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Brutal.
Now, here's the thing, though. And we can get into this later on when we talk about our own feelings about the film with the reviews and such. I'm not quite so certain she's a bad guy. I'm not quite so certain she's the antagonist of this film.
That's interesting to me.
There are ways to look at it where she is, but I think there are ways to look at it where she isn't. And
I think it's more intriguing to do that, but it's also, I think it's a lot harder to get past the entire gist of the movie doing that. But we can talk about it. I like the theory. I like the theory, but the production goes like they film like the production's amazing. Basically, McMurphy is so hard to cast that they have time to basically find this incredible, diverse cast of actors. Some from the Broadway production, some people they picked up off the streets. Some people they picked up working at the hospital they were filming in. The character Dr. Spivey is played by the man who actually ran the hospital, Dean Brooks. He ran the hospital in Oregon where they filmed the movie, and they basically cast him in this movie. And and then they have the supporting cast. You have Danny DeVito. You have Danny DeVito, Brad Dourif in his introduction film. You have Christopher Lloyd,
Vincent
Schiavelli. You have so many.
Personal favorite of mine, William Dewell.
William Dewell is very good. Also, a personal favorite of mine, Sidney Lassick, as Charlie Cheswick. I love him as Charlie Cheswick. But they get this.
His role feels like it would have been played by like somebody like Stephen Dorff about, not Stephen Dorff, Stephen Furst, who played Dorfman in Animal House just a few years later.
Flounder, for the people who you're using actual names. Flounder.
But don't you? Because there are several times.
Oh no, they're
so
like.
Almost,
I'm surprised. I'm surprised this movie isn't like that championship season where it hasn't been made every 5 years, 10, 20 years. I'm surprised it hasn't been made every 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
But I think people are so afraid of it that they just stay away. A couple comments.
DeVito is so good in this, and what's really struck me is
Martini. Yeah, Martini. He's great.
We're so used to Danny DeVito either with a really bad comb over as Louis De Palma on Taxi in the 80s, or just a receding hairline, and here he has just a nice full head of hair to the point where I'm like, he looks like he could have been Richard Kind's younger brother.
He looks
because the way he smiles.
He's an adorable character.
He looks like Richard Kind a bit.
There's a moment in the film late in the film where they sneak a woman in and he's dancing with the woman at the end of the night, and he's barely at her breasts. He's perfect. His head is perfectly nuzzled in between two boobs. So let's see. Tim Snyder writes, "I want my cigarettes." Yes, Charlie Cheswick. Amazing sequence. It's actually, Tim, and we can curse on the show. I want my fucking cigarettes right fucking now. Michael Berryman, yes. Hills Have Eyes, all kinds of things. There's so many people in the movie. He doesn't get the thing. And Tim also brings up the incredible Will Sampson, who basically they found him when they were scouting the location for the fishing charter sequence. There was a guy who said one of the local park rangers was a huge Indian. And they were like, who? And it turned out to be Will Sampson. So, like, the idea that nobody wanted any of these roles led them to be able to fill the cast out. It also led them to be able to secure Milos Forman, who is basically, you know, coming in from the side and basically coming over from Czechoslovakia and basically, it's Czechoslovakia, right? And basically kind of do it else. Also, some weird casting things. The idea that we have Scatman Crothers and Jack Nicholson, and they almost cast Shelley Duvall in the role of Candy, is not lost on the Shining fans among us. Scatman Crothers also plays a character named Turkle, and the other side to that is Joe Turkle is one of the stars of The Shining, which is just, Rich, I'll say it, it's fucking weird. It's weird, Rich.
Scatman Crothers. I have a nice picture of Joe Turkle up on my wall there that I took with him and Rutger Hauer introducing a screening of Blade Runner years ago.
Have I ever told you my Joe Turkle stories? I'm sure I have. Okay, really quick.
Yeah, let's sidebar and go there.
Yeah, we love sidebarring. Real quick, my Joe Turkle story is this. My dad ran a theater in Monticello, New York in 1980. Joe Turkle was from the Catskills, and he lived in the town where my dad ran this theater. When my dad found out, he put Joe Turkle on the outer marquee against company policy. He worked for General Cinema at the time. He put Joe Turkle on the marquee for a day so that Joe Turkle could come down and take pictures with his family.
Oh, nice.
Of the marquee. And then he became a lifelong friend of my dad. And so every year he would come in and visit. The two people who met my dad in the Catskills were Burt Young, because he was training boxers, and we had a lot of fights in the Catskills, and then Joe Turkle. Now Joe Turkle would later come and visit after The Shining, and ask my father if his new theater chain, which was a private theater chain, was getting his new movie, and he showed up into the office, and I remember him sitting there crossing his legs, and my dad was talking. Oh, my dad was obsessed with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which is a movie he was in from the 60s. But he came in wearing a set jacket, Rich, a Blade Runner set jacket. And it was this gorgeous starter-esque jacket with the Blade Runner logo across the back. And he had on the sides were his character name, Tyrell. And he was ever so nice. And my dad made his day and made his family's day by putting his name up on the marquee. And so it was Joe Turkle's always been a warm presence in my life. So, but back to sorry,
for another time.
Another Blade Runner conversation we'll have someday. But the cast of this movie is astounding. It's large. They're able to find the actual hospital that the book is about. They film in the actual hospital. The actual hospital still exists, at least until 2022, although most of the buildings and the basketball courts have been demolished in recent expansions. But they film on location, and they also have almost a week worth of sitting down rehearsals where the actors are hanging out with patients. They're hanging out with patients that have the same diseases or same mental conditions that their characters have. And if you believe any of the rumors, their rumors are bound that Louise Fletcher and Nicholson were in on a shock therapy treatment of one of the patients, which I think would be a huge no-no today.
Yes,
it would be something that would at least be frowned upon. But Nicholson said he needed it to be able to get the moment right of biting down on the mouth guard and you know what I mean? Like, and it's
a harrowing moment. It's
absolutely a terrifying moment.
as a moment of horror almost.
Scary. It's the scary. Also, it's scary how funny he is right up until the moment it happens, because he's doing all kinds of jokes going into it. But the production, aside from the really amazing story about Kirk Douglas, a Hollywood legend getting shut out of a role he created on Broadway, and basically giving it to his son, and his son ends up, and this is before Kirk Douglas received his honorary Oscars, his son wins an Oscar before him because of this. And is it not, like, as two people who watch a lot of old movies and understand old movies, is it not one of the saddest stories? Not sad, but like just amazing stories of film history that
it's bittersweet.
I'm
sure he was very happy for his son to win as a producer.
He was never bad. He was never a bad person. Bitter, no. I'm sure. But the idea that Kirk Douglas wins an honorary Oscar after Michael Douglas, with the role that he originated on Broadway, after telling his dad that even though he's producing, he can't be the character anymore.
If you can't be in the movie, at least keep it in the family.
I know. I just find it to be one of the saddest old Hollywood stories. Like one of the saddest. Well, I'm a huge Kirk Douglas. I've always been a Kirk Douglas fan. Lonely Are the Brave. So many great Kirk Douglas movies. But this movie is the beginning of Nicholson, right? This is the beginning of the Nicholson that will dominate Hollywood for the next 15, 20 years. He gets into the mid-90s where he's still making movies that are making money and making bank. Mm-hmm. But this is the movie where you get the eye flails. This is the movie where you get the raised eyebrows. This is the movie where you get the hair slicked back and just kind of like running with it, even though he's bald, and just, going bald at least. And the production goes really smoothly, except for, the idea that they end up firing cinematographer Haskell Wexler. Right. So one of the things that happens is Forman, basically Forman didn't want to allow anybody to see dailies. And Wexler was in the camp with Nicholson that maybe the cast should be able to see dailies to be able to progress and do things. And when he went against Forman kind of fired him, and they brought in Bill Butler, and both end up nominated for Academy Awards. And so it becomes this, Wexler goes on at some point to believe that he wasn't fired because of the fighting with Forman and because he was on Nicholson's side, but he was also producing a, funny enough, in kind of echoing a little bit our talk from earlier with the Marvel executive, Haskell was part of a Weather Underground documentary where the documentary actually filmed the very controversial group when they were on the run from the police, and he was part of that filming. And so they were maybe he got fired for that. Who knows? But, a lot of people talk about that he was fighting with Forman and taking the star side. And then basically at the end, when they're both going to the Oscars, he basically says Nicholson hated Milos Forman the entire time. They never talked. So
they never worked again together. So.
That is true. They never worked together again. But Wexler didn't, I think it's really interesting though. We're doing 2 Oscar-nominated movies. Didn't Wexler did In the Heat of the Night as well. So we're talking, we're talking little things that happen as we pick these movies that we're doing, where they kind of
way around the camera.
Yeah, he really does know his way around the camera. The movie inside the hospital is claustrophobic. It is right on top of you when the characters get outside for the bus trip and the fishing trip and basketball sequences and anything else outside when the chief escapes at the end. It definitely has a more open, it's an incredibly shot film. So production happens. We go merrily. Is there anything else you want to cover production wise?
Not really. I mean, I think the rehearsal time is very self-evident in the performances, where they did, I don't want to say, studied, these people in this institution, because that sounds somewhat clinical and dehumanizing.
It sounds even worse, actually.
Yeah.
It actually kind of ties in with the criticism of the film that we're going to talk about, like, as we progressed with what we know about mental health. But I think it's an interesting thing. They had a week of rehearsals.
There's not a false note from anybody in this whole entire film.
No, there
Every
really isn't.
Single performance is just right where it needs to be, and it's perfect.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. And even the small characters get a ton to do. So it opens, and Rich, it opens in November of 1975. It becomes the second highest grossing film of 1975 with a gross of $109 million. It also is one of the 7th highest grossing films of all time at the time it was released. Mm-hmm. And it ends up grossing because it releases so late in the year. It ends up becoming one of the highest grossing films of 1976 as well, which is utterly astounding. It ends up with a worldwide gross of $163.2 million. And it becomes the highest grossing film in the history of United Artists. And when you look back at the storied history of United Artists, all the way back to Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and it is the highest grossing UA release of all time at that moment. So, wow, right? And then you look at the numbers. The numbers, Rich, are, it plays for weeks, and the budget itself is $4.4 million. It grosses 163 worldwide, including 54 million around the world. So this is one of the first big Oscar movies that not only grosses $108 million in domestic box office, it grosses over $50 million internationally and becomes a worldwide sensation.
Yeah.
Nicholson becomes a worldwide star from this.
Yeah. This is one of the first films where, I'm just like slightly tangentially aware that it existed, that we've covered as part of this whole thing. Star Wars hadn't come out yet. Star Wars was another year or two away. So I was kind of like not totally locked in on movies yet. But I do, have these vague memories as a 7-year-old of hearing people talk about this film, or maybe seeing a newspaper ad or something like that. So that we're starting to morph into stuff that we're not putting into historical context so much, but as also personal context.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was a movie I remember when I was a kid. I remember my dad watching it on HBO when it premiered on HBO, and maybe him popping a blank cassette in and taping it while he watched it on HBO on a Betamax. So I remember, Beta, yes. My dad always thought the picture quality is better on Beta than it was on VHS. A little bit obsessed. Was very sad that VHS won. But I remember it tangentially in the sense that one of the things when I was watching the Oscar telecast, right, it is the movie, the poster, which is right up here in the corner for us. When you're watching the Oscars as a kid, Nicholson was always in the front row at the Oscars. And he was always that version of his face, the way it's on the poster right there. And it's wild, but when you look at it with the glasses, looking up the people that are on a stage at the Oscars, it's very much that smile. It's very much, Cuckoo's Nest inspired, right? And it becomes like a signature thing. Now, the box office for this film, utterly astounding, and the idea that you have a movie about mental health that grosses 54 million internationally when, it's not an action movie. It's not a comedy. It's not animated. It's something deadly serious. It's a big Oscar winner. It becomes one of the most, it's such an incredible story, and it becomes one of the biggest hits, with regards for Michael Douglas. Michael Douglas rides it not only to the Academy Awards, but this box office and this gamble propels him to being one of the more lucrative film producers Hollywood-wise going forward. We'll talk about that later when we get to legacy and franchise. But box office occurs. Critical response then and now. Now, here's the thing. I was thinking about this today as I watched it and as I'm going through it. I think the critical response then and now are very similar in the sense that I think the movie, for me, it is perfect. The actors are all great. Nicholson as promised. Louise Fletcher is as promised. I think where I fall on this movie, though, is it the movie where the mental patients are transformed and changed by meeting the rebel? Or are we with the rebel laughing at the patients, right? And that's I think where you have some critics who look at it and go, it's a little bit, it could be perceived as mean-spirited because our surrogate, McMurphy, is a character that is there feigning being insane.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on we find out that he actually is, kind of violent and kind of unhinged at times, right? But he's making fun of the insane patients, and we're not necessarily laughing with them in their group therapy. We may be laughing at them, which at the time, no matter how meticulous you make the movie, it for me becomes kind of a weird place. And well, I'll let you talk because I've talked enough.
Okay. Well, first of all, we only have McMurphy's word that he is faking being crazy to escape going to regular jail. And granted, later on, he does have that realization that, oh, everybody else is here voluntarily, and I have so much time left, and I might not get out when that time is up. So lends credence to that. However, I would still say there is at least a slim possibility that he's an unreliable narrator. He just might actually be fucking nuts, and they might have sent him off there. And he's told himself, and he's made up this whole thing in his head that he volunteered or played crazy to avoid a regular
fair
sentence.
I think the other thing that would support it, though, would be there's a sequence he has a conversation when he finds out Chief is really not dumb and stupid, where he's like, you fooled him. So maybe you're right. Maybe he is an unreliable narrator, and the idea that Chief has fooled him and I wasn't able to, or maybe that's part of it.
I think, though, I don't think the movie is necessarily holding up any of the other patients to ridicule. I could see where there would be the impulse to, like, Danny DeVito's character very clearly could have been pushed into, because he's kind of like
it's childlike.
That could very easily, with a little bit of a push of that performance, become very comedic, cringily so. But I think there's always a bit of empathy for all of these characters here that really kind of keeps it from becoming that. There's only maybe one real comedic moment, and that's when Christopher Lloyd basically gives himself the hot foot, and he's sitting there, and then his eyes kind of bug out, and he's like, "Whoa!" And it's funny, and I think that whole scene needs that moment of comic tension to release, but almost immediately it ceases to be funny because we're back into the reality of all they see is him jumping up and screaming, and that's when the orderlies come in and carry him off.
They really kind of have a heavy hand with him at that moment, not realizing that the cigarette that is part of a comedic bit, the inmate flicking it around, has gone into the lower part of his pajamas. I'm dying. So I was looking at like Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert had a very love-hate relationship with the movie, right? When we're talking about, when we're talking about this particular movie, he's basically, one of the things he stands by wholeheartedly is Nicholson's performance, but he also kind of gets into his review. One of the things he said that I really, really found, if his performance is justly celebrated, Louise Fletcher's, despite the Oscar, is not enough appreciated. This may be because her Nurse Ratched is so thoroughly contemptible, and because she embodies so completely the qualities we all, men and women, have been taught to fear in certain kind of female authority figures. A woman who has subsumed sexuality, humanity, and duty and righteousness. Dressed in her quasi-military nurse's costume with its little hat and its Civil War-style cape, she's a dominatrix and warden, followed everywhere but the small, unspeaking nurse who is her acolyte. I think that's a fair critique in that Nicholson's on the poster. Nicholson basically carries this rebel character the rest of his career, all the way through his career. Louise Fletcher is kind of never heard from again. And it's a real shame, and but I would also say that one of the things that there's a sequence in the movie where they're talking about whether to send him back to prison, and she has a whole little sentence to the guy where she's like, well, we're not going to send him back. I want him back in the ward because we don't want to pass on our responsibilities. And it's bone chilling in the sense that, because she views him as a responsibility. So she views him as this kind of rebel scamp that she needs to kind of like treat and fix. And all the people in her care are somebody that she's fixing, even if she has to manipulate them to do so. What she does to Billy Bibbit, should say. Bibbit is say that 3 times fast. What she does to the Brad Dourif character is one of the most, she gets a certain amount of comeuppance in that she almost gets choked to death. But what she does to that Brad Dourif character is insanely evil. Like realizing that the young man just lost his virginity and then immediately saying, well, I wonder how your mother would feel about it. And it's just so like, it's so dark and so.
I think, and they don't get into any of this at all, I don't believe, unless it's kind of touched upon in the novel. But I think so much of what is driving Nurse Ratched is more of a very prim, strict religious upbringing, and how that just imbues some people with not just I have faith in something and this is what I believe, but that kind of righteousness about their beliefs,
a ferocity
over into other things outside of their faith. And so they're like, no matter what I am doing, I am right because I am
steadfast.
Yeah,
and she's also manipulative.
She is trying to run the ward in an orderly fashion, in what she's been trained to believe is the way to do it. And so she represents society, the system, normality, blah blah blah. And of course,
in some way, she also represents. If you look at it like the way Kirk Douglas looked at the book and the play and the movie, eventually. Kirk Douglas always viewed it as like a communist takeover or paranoia kind of thing, where somebody that's in charge of everything, what you say, what you do, when you get your cigarettes, when you get your pills, what time you get up in the morning, what music you listen to. And so he always viewed the McMurphy character as the ultimate like individualist, right? That comes in he's the bomb in the ecosystem that basically can't we just watch a goddamn ball game? Like, can't we just and she's so steadfast in her rules. There's 18 people in this ward. You need 10 votes, and the voting is closed. Like, it's just, it's a dark.
I can sort of see, her side of things by her needing to keep order, and somebody like McMurphy coming in excuse me, is definitely an agent of chaos and a threat to that order. Now, she only sees him as a threat, so she doesn't see where he gets some of these people to come out of their shells. Some of these people who historically were shown don't interact well together to interact well together.
Right, because she's impassive. She's passive.
She got the chief. He got the chief to kind of loosen up, even though some of that was an act. But to even get him to kind of like go along with what he was doing is still an amazing accomplishment. And rather than embrace that and use that, she just still sees him as ultimately, a bad thing that's come in,
right? A thorn,
because it's suddenly out of her control. So then she, sends him off
on his merry way. Well, the scene with Billy where he finds out Billy's in the asylum of his own choice with his mom and everything, and he's like, "You're a kid. You should be out. Like, what do you do? You should be out. Like, you should be out dogging girls. What are you doing here? Like, this is crazy." And
the fact that she reacted very negatively to that idea, it is kind of like the biggest stressor to me, that she has this very proper religious background. And so sex is evil, dirty, and disgusting, so you should save it for marriage and the one you love.
Fair. I also think I think that the reviews, one of the things that is also a great part of the Ebert review, and it's one of the best sentences he's ever written, in my opinion. Ready? Is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest not a great film because it is manipulative, or is it great because it is so superbly manipulative? And I think that's part of it. I think one of the reasons it plays like a great film for me is you have these two divergent, opposite forces that are at work on this entire, the facility, the people within the facility, each other, right? You have, and hers is a much tougher performance because everything has to go in looks and how she looks at things and how she fades. Nicholson gets the easier performance in a sense that he gets to kind of just bounce off walls and be, walk into the room acting like he's been affected by the electroshock therapy and then bouncing out of it and like, had you guys. And so it's an easier performance. Hers is, it's all in subtle looks and glances and how she picks up her book and closes the voting down and closes the book. And then he comes to her and he's like, we have the vote. The chief raises his hand and she's like, yeah, but the voting's closed, and it's like the ultimate mom that you just can't stand her. Mm-hmm. And I think, it is one of the best movies. And when you look at it, the legacy is interesting.
I was gonna say, for that performance though, you have to have at least a little bit of an acknowledgement that the editing team found a lot of those moments in the footage and made sure that they were in there. I
would agree with that.
Louise Fletcher could have been acting her ass off, and if they didn't, pick the right moments, that would not have. I don't think it would have worked as well. And thankfully, the director and the editor all worked together to make sure that they got what she was giving. And
I think I would also say you're right that the performance is there from her. The words she is given though are also pretty damn good. Like the screenplay, one of the adapted screenplays we're going to talk about, and one of the things we have to talk about in the legacy. So, for anybody who watches the show religiously and regularly, we've been talking about the Great Five. Right. And this is one of the Great Five movies. We had one, It Happened One Night, that we did. And this is another one. This movie won at the Academy Awards in 1976, the 48th Academy Awards, by the way, in 1976. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Adapted Screenplay. So the big five, the Great Five, right? Mm-hmm. And it ties, it's one of the only 3 films that have done it in history, and it ties It Happened One Night. It wins 5 of 9 awards on that night. And it becomes part of the National Film Registry in 1993, protected by the Library of Congress. It is the 33rd rated film in the history of film with regards to the AFI 100 movies, 100 years. It's number 33 on the list, so it's 33 in. And the legacy, I think the biggest legacy for me is Nicholson rides this to the end of his career. Like, he rides this role, and everything about him in every other role he's like, he almost every other role he plays, except like maybe like really late in his career, like something like About Schmidt, which is kind of the antithesis of Randle McMurphy. You know what I mean? Like, he's got all of the mental stuff going on. It's the opposite of Randle McMurphy, right? But this character, he rides, like, the legacy of this movie is, it gives us a 37-year-old Nicholson that is going to end up dominating the late 70s, early 80s, and some of the 90s. It's a big legacy to also go along with the Great Five legacy, which may or may not come up again in our Oscar decade cavalcade.
Yeah. In terms of franchise viability, obviously, we already mentioned how not a lot of people have, there's been no attempts to remake this film or do a new version of the book. However you want to classify that, since it's based on
because the book is right. The book is more surrealistic. The book is more some of the characters are in their heads, actually in their heads. But you're right.
If somebody were to readapt the book, I would consider it a new adaptation of the book, not a remake of this movie. The same way I look at the Coen Brothers' True Grit is a new adaptation of the novel and not a remake of the old John Wayne flick.
Well, and especially, you're right, nobody's remade this. And again, this is something that also came up this week. If we're going to remake great movies of the past, like, because there was a big talk this week that could have been mentioned earlier in the show, Vertigo possibly getting remade. But think about this. This is one of the movies that hasn't been remade. And we were talking about a movie we did called That Championship Season, which has been done with a different cast over the last 15 years, right? Every 10 or so years, That Championship Season gets recast and redone. The play by Jason Miller into a movie, into other adaptations and other stage versions. This one doesn't at all. Like, there's no talk of redoing it. There's no talk of touching it, because I think the performances, Louise Fletcher in particular, they're scary. They're scary performances. Right, they're scary good, and they're also scary. Like, who in the right goddamn mind wants to do this? Who in the right mind wants to remake this, or even if you talk yourself into adapting the book again a different way, where you're making you maybe make it a little bit weird. You know what I mean? Who's doing it?
This I think goes into that very small group of films that no one will ever, I don't think, try to do a direct remake.
I tend to agree.
Casablanca, even though I will say this, Barbed Wire is a science fiction remake of Casablanca.
Wow, that's going to be the hashtag for this week's episode.
Think about it. Barbed
Wire Casablanca, bitch. Anyway, but yeah, no, I agree. But it's also, I think one of the idea, the legacy of this movie, you got the Nicholson legacy. One of the things that also comes up is this particular brand of film. When you look at it, it becomes the Cage Bird Sing movies is what I call them, right? So the Shawshank Redemption has got to bask a little bit in the legacy of this movie, where you have two friends that, in the case of Shawshank, both get out, but in the only one flies over the cuckoo's nest. But also, like, you look at movies like that eventually will tackle the really difficult mental health problems and issues in our society, like Girl Interrupted.
Shot in Harrisburg.
Or even like something like Boy Erased, which is dealing with a very serious subject of making sending gay kids to transition therapy, which is just
there have been a couple of movies over the last several years along those lines. Some of them have been played a little bit more for comedic effect, I think. And I don't think they.
But I'm a cheerleader.
A real horror show that gay conversion therapy and what kind of quackery that is.
But yeah, I mean, but they all tie into this. This movie is one of the first movies behind a look behind the curtain of what is going on in our mental facilities, and not necessarily like the crazy bonkers version we had in some 50s movies or some 60s movies.
I will say, if we look back at Lost Weekend, we get a little bit of a glimpse there in that one sequence.
In the drunk tank. Yes.
You get
a little bit of the glimpse. Everybody's in the exact same outfits. Yes, a little bit. And it kind of ties in with this as well.
But so it's an interesting thread that we, find
that
here.
We're weaving. Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny. We picked these movies not out of a hat, but kind of not necessarily realizing we're going to see the ties. Like a couple of ties we picked because we knew what we were trying to do. But some of these ties and threads that string through these great Oscar-winning movies is they're there. Like, dual performances that feed off of each other. Like last week we had, Rod Steiger and Sidney Poitier. This week we have Louise Fletcher and Nicholson, who are just kind of chumming the water for each other, feeding.
Oh God, yeah.
And it's just, it's rebel versus status, but like a movie like Girl Interrupted will tackle a lot of the same time frames that happen in this movie because it takes place in the 60s because Sandy Koufax is still pitching. And it basically will deal with a lot of the, the idea of female institutions. So, this movie allows access for other people to say, hey, what was going on in mental institutions? And one of the great legacies of this movie is also how some of these things were viewed as mental problems that we will eventually not view them as mental problems. The idea that you're nervous around or have anxiety around women, or that you may be a homosexual, or that, they're not going to be mental things that you're put in mental institutions for. Yes, which is a great legacy.
They're treatable. We're just not going to warehouse you away from
We're
society.
Not going to put you away.
I had a thought earlier today about this movie, and because it's partially episodic.
I love your thoughts.
Episodic.
I love your thoughts, so I'm dying to hear.
And I was like, I don't know if it actually could have been done, but could you see them maybe trying to do something along the lines of how they adapted MASH from a film to television with this property? Or would that have just been too tough to do?
No, I think, I don't know about MASH. I think this particular property, if somebody were ever to try to tackle it, I don't think you'd see a movie remake. I think you would see a slight adaptation of Ken Kesey's novel as a TV adaptation on, say, Hulu or FX, where you have 10 episodes, maybe you call it Ratched, or whatever, and you basically have her impacts. Again, this would make the character super evil, but you maybe have her impacts on all of the men that come through her institution doors and what happens to them. You have the Billy episode, they all kind of intertwine. The other thing is she never, of all the decisions she makes in the movie, she never gets any repercussions except for Nicholson choking her, but she gets the ultimate win because she lobotomizes him. So so for me, like, would it be an interesting thing if you had like a Ratched maybe mini series or series where you basically have her?
We did.
Did we do that?
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, that sounds really familiar.
That does sound familiar. I've never seen it, so for me, it's an original thought right now.
I'm literally looking this up right now as to where it wound up.
I've never seen it, so I just want to say,
oh gee, it's a surprise. It's a Ryan Murphy show.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That makes total sense.
It was on Netflix.
Was it on Netflix? I didn't see it.
Yeah, one season. It was supposed to go 2. It was originally picked for 2 seasons. They only.
But
did
if it
one
was Murphy,
season,
was it over the top campy?
I think it was a victim of the pandemic. There.
Was it also just super campy and dumb?
Probably.
Okay. But like I said, I think
might check it out, but
I think then get away from the ratchet part. Just have a mental health show about these particular people that come into contact with the Randle McMurphy character, maybe. And the episodes are all about their particular, how they got admitted and how they were, like, how Billy's mother put him in. I could see it that way. I don't think you're ever going to see a film version. I don't think we're ever going to get as ludicrous as we are talking about Vertigo remake, which I'm not on board for. I love Robert Downey Jr., but that movie is going to be real hard to remake. And remaking Hitchcock, I think we've tried it, and I think it didn't go well. No. Just because that man had a different feel.
De Palma's probably sitting at home going, "Really, guys, come on. You couldn't have called me for this." But
well, and De Palma's like, every once in a while he makes a movie and it's like, you've made the best Hitchcock movie since Hitchcock. And so that's his gift. It's also his curse, like, because he's stuck in that box. But I think that when you come out of this movie, you get movies that deal with mental health issues. You get movies that have characters that might be heroic but might be flawed, and have, Billy becomes, in later times could become a character that, somebody who commits suicide could become a character that's a hero of their piece. Like, I was thinking, one of the things that came to mind today for me a little bit with the Billy character, right, who's dealing with the parental pressures, it's got a little bit Dead Poet Society vibe to it, right? I mean, so it inspires us looking at mental health, and every once in a while it inspires a movie that, like The Dream Team, where it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it's
just the day out.
It's just for laughs. It's just the day out. And that's, I think, the lasting impression is that, I don't
think I've thought about The Dream Team since that movie came out when I was in college.
Crazy people, where they're making ads. You know what I mean? I just want to sob. Anyway, but that's what I mean. Like, one of the things about these great movies, that the legacies they inspire, it's a ripple effect. So this movie comes out in 1976, and the ripple effect for all the legacy basically goes through, the 90s, 2000s. You know what I mean? And we're still dealing with mental health. The mental health crisis that's going on since the pandemic, and the mental health crisis that is being tackled in film and television and miniseries and all these things are still ongoing, where we're still dealing with and learning about and trying to figure out anxiety and how people deal with it. And, every once in a while we get a show and a movie like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest that gives us insights and gives us the idea that caged humans aren't necessarily the best humans. Sure. And, it's a special legacy. And being one of the great five, the idea that a film somehow, in the day and age that you and I live in right now with the Oscars, a film winning picture, actor, actress, director, screenplay is just not something that happens anymore. Like, it happened this year, right? But not everything, obviously. But it happened where we had a lot of wins for one movie, but it usually doesn't happen. So when we say it's a big deal to win the big awards, this is one of 3 movies, and we've covered 2 of them. So we may cover the third. That has done this great event where you have a killer male performance that is feeding off of a killer female performance, and then the movie becomes special, and the director gets a lot of credit for keeping everybody on script, and then they look at the script and go, "Wow, the script's really good." So it's an incredible kind of, like, all the ducks in a row kind of thing.
Very much so. Very much so.
And with that, we come to Ducks in a Row, which is no, it's not our next movie. But we come to our 80s, The Mighty Ducks. No, we do come to our 80s movie, and I was telling you. So this is not necessarily a movie you would think would be a JW favorite. And I'm not particularly sure it's my favorite movie from 1983. I'm a big Right Stuff fan, right? I love The Right Stuff. Philip Kaufman's fantastic movie about the American space program. But I do love me some Terms of Endearment.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not going to lie about it. It is, for me, it is one of the things we're talking about, strings and our things. This is one of the movies where you have a nice back production story that we're going to talk about next week that is going to drive you insane almost as much as Shirley MacLaine was driven insane by Deborah Winger, and all kinds of stuff there. But also the idea that we're talking about performances that feed off of each other, and we're talking about the Nicholson thing, and it's not something we thought about when we did a 70s movie and an 80s movie with Nicholson. But you're going to see a lot of, if you decide to watch a movie, by the way, available for free on HBO Max right now as we speak. It's the kind of movie where it's about a mother and daughter relationship. It is beautifully well done. It is beautifully written. It is beautifully directed. It is one of the fantastic 80s movies. And for me, it has a star performance in it that is unheralded compared to the woman who won the Academy Award. I think Deborah Winger's performance in this movie is one of the great unheralded performances because she holds her own in every single goddamn scene she's in with every single actor that she's lined up against. It's one of my favorite Deborah Winger performances. She's phenomenal. There's a scene in a hospital towards the end we'll talk about next week that is one of the most stirring, emotional, like incredible things. And that'll be next week on our show. I'm super excited about that. And last comments, hold on. Another Jack movie. Yeah, it wasn't designed this way, Ken. It really wasn't.
It's one of the threads we discovered.
It's one of the threads we discovered. But it's a great movie. And if you haven't seen it or you haven't seen it recently, it is a movie you can watch with your wife or your daughter or your wife and your daughter or anybody that
your girlfriend,
anything,
your girlfriend,
your significant other, anything. It is a stand-up performance from Jack Nicholson, stand-up performance from Shirley MacLaine, and again, an incredibly unheralded performance by Deborah Winger that will set your heart ablaze with how good it is. And this, after coming from earlier in the year when we had a Deborah Winger movie that we both kind of watched and just went, I don't know that I like this movie. That ended up making a lot more money than any of us thought of. But you can find us on Facebook and go back and find us on YouTube and go back. Rich, last comment. Hold on. We got a comment from great show tonight. Good night. Good night, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Ken writes, most Oscars in the 80s, The Last Emperor. Yeah. But does anybody love The Last Emperor, Ken? No.
As a Talking Heads fan, I do because that got David Byrne his Oscar.
I understand, but the movie itself is no.
Well, next year
we'll talk.
If we do it,
and maybe it'll be a movie for next year.
Stuff.
If we do an Oscar cavalcade next year.
Oh, and Joe, good luck with the thing in Florida this coming weekend.
Yeah, Joe's got a big MegaCon thing, and he has a pre-show coming up this Wednesday on the Indie Escape Network with all the folks from Harlow's Haunt, Terry Jarrow. That's a big thing coming up on Wednesday night. We're super excited about that on the network. Rich, where can people find your writings, your musings, your lovely mug?
My stuff. Okay. All of my writing is available at filmbuffonline.com. Coming up this week, we're going to have my review in just another day or two of Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves. And spoiler, we finally got a good Dungeons & Dragons movie. Hallelujah.
It's fucking amazing.
It's so wonderful. We also have a multi-part story coming up, editorial coming up from Bill Gadavaskis, who has been our longtime FilmBuff's comic book movie editor. Every year he has done a state of the comic book film piece where he looks at what's happened in the last year, what's happening coming up. And this is the 10th anniversary, I think, of him doing this. And it kind of exploded into a four, possibly 5-part piece that's going to start running tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. 1 part each day. Some good. I assume
some Shazam. Bad. Shazam will be involved in this.
Oh yeah.
Poor Shazam.
There's some some good, some bad. And he takes a really good deep dive into an analysis of what's going on with the genre right now. Also, got the Big Picture podcast with me and my co-host Natasha Bogutsky. You can find all those episodes at FilmBuff Online with a little button on the side there, or you can just go to bigpicturepod.com. I'm on Twitter at FilmBuffRich, and if all that weren't enough,
but wait, there's more.
This coming April 15th, which is a Saturday, I'm gonna pimp out a project that's not my writing, but it is my short film producing. One of the short films I've made with my good friend Natasha, called 8 Years with Gilda, is making its U.S. premiere at the Northeastern Pennsylvania Film Festival coming up April 15th, which is a Saturday, part of a short film block that starts, I think, at 2 o'clock. If you're interested, there's a lot of great stuff going on that weekend at that show. If you're in the region, it's going to be up at Waverly, which is just a little north of Scranton, at the Waverly Com House. And that's nipafilmfestival.com. Done with my pimping.
I got you. Okay, my pimping's easy. Twitter, Instagram, JW the Movie Guy on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find me on Tuesday nights doing Loud and Nerdy. It's been very busy, actually, on Loud and Nerdy. Everybody's showing up all of a sudden, which is nice. I like having people to talk to. We have a big show tomorrow night. We're going to talk about some movie music. We're going to talk about the very controversial topic on whether or not the MCU should be killing off these people and not just recasting things like comic books. And we're going to have that tomorrow night on Loud and Nerdy, where you can find the Loud and Nerdy podcast, and the Loud and Nerdy page, and the Loud and Nerdy group, which is super great. A lot of fun. A lot of cool things going on there. That's every Tuesday night. And, of course, you can find me on Monday nights on the Indie Escape Network with my good friend Rich Drees as we discuss old movies in the best way possible, giving it the generation movie treatment, which is just looking at it from all sides and trying to find where it fits in this world that we live in right now, 2023. Thank you so much for joining us. Joe says thank you. Joe, it's okay. I like pimping out stuff. Also, I do want to pimp out something I will be doing. Sunday night, I will be, if Joe is not available, I will be producing the end of the night with David Madison and Scott Schiaffo. So I'll be trying to fill Joe's very large but sensible shoes in a producing role with David Madison and Scott Schiaffo on a Sunday night. And then I'll have Monday to do Terms of Endearment, where I'll get my good cry in on Monday before the show. By the way, Terms of Endearment, if you're going to watch it and join us next week, it's a 7 hanky movie. It's got a lot of good tears. It also has Shirley MacLaine smacking the shit out of a kid, which is phenomenal. Just really quick. One of the fastest slaps in film history. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a great night. We'll see everybody next week. Lots of good movies coming out. Got Dungeons & Dragons. Rich is not wrong. If you love the game, you're going to love the movie. If you don't love the game, you're going to love the movie. It's so good. Pine is great. Everybody is wonderful. It is everything. All the trailers and hoopla you're seeing online about it and on commercials, it's right. It's goofy and fun, and you care about all the characters. And if you don't think, because we're still talking a little bit Bond, if you don't think Regé Page is going to be Bond, I have another word. I think this movie might be the one that gets him through the 007 door, in all honesty.
Wow. But that's
his Paladin is so great. I've played Paladins before. First off, I'm a huge D&D nerd. I've played Paladins before. The kid I went with, his name's Chris. I play with him, And he looked at me and he goes, your paladin is just like that paladin. I'm like, yes, I feel all choices were justified. All my choices as a paladin are justified. When you watch him on screen and how cool as balls he is, how unironic, how completely like, it's an amazing performance and it's great. And he's super heroic. But the star of the show is Pine. Pine is an exceptional talent and he doesn't get a lot to do. And you're going to hear the talk on the right and the craziness on the right is going to be that the males are feminized or whatever. But in reality, they're just guys that happen to make mistakes and they're not really good around women. So it's okay. There are a lot of us out there. So everybody should fucking relax.
Making their saving throws.
They're having trouble making their saving throws. That's exactly right. Thank you for joining us tonight. We don't need a saving throw when you're watching our show, Generation Movie. Have a great week. We'll see everybody next week. Bye.
Take care. Bye.